My name is Eric Nogelmeier. We're going to be looking at a feature within the CRM called Blueprint that's going to help you and your users follow your entire sales process without deviating from it. And this is actually really helpful to help you scale your business and really adapt your sales process in the future as well. But before we get into it completely, I just wanted to talk about a pretty common problem that's in all of software, and you're probably going to see and be able to extrapolate this problem within your CRM as well. And that's that your users aren't always going to use your CRM the way that you intended to do it. Especially if you guys have a pretty complicated sales process, there might be a lot of mistakes that they can make along the way that can actually end up causing you to lose a lot of deals or not being able to qualify some leads as well. So for example, if they get in leads, they might forget to add in mandatory information. At certain points of your sales stage, they might forget to do certain actions, not follow up properly. Maybe they qualify some leads that weren't qualified. Maybe they make a status for a lead and consider it a junk without even contacting it. So in one-on-one, this doesn't seem like a big deal, but over time, this can culminate to losing a lot of potential deals and a lot of potential clients as well. Before we get into what exactly the blueprint is, I just want to go ahead and talk about a scenario in which this can kind of happen. So I know a lot of the presenters so far have talked about a car dealership. It's a pretty easy example to kind of see where we would have issues with this. So say some leads come in, and you want your salespeople to follow up on it, make contact with them, get some pertinent information, and then get them to schedule a test drive. Along the process, there's a couple of different things that can happen. Maybe they don't answer, and you want them to leave a voicemail. Maybe after they test drive, the salesperson isn't going through and actually sending a follow-up email. These are just a couple of the examples that you can see, especially thinking about your own sales process, of some really mandatory information or some really important parts of your sales stage that you want them to follow. If we look at it, a new lead can come in, and there's a couple of different things that can happen. We can reach out to the customer. They might not answer, so we want our users to go ahead and leave them a voicemail. Maybe you do get in contact, and we want to capture some really important information, maybe the make and model of the car, the year, and also schedule a test drive date as well. And then also maybe someone goes ahead and comes on in and they just immediately want to test drive. At that point, your agents will know that they're qualified right along. So these can go through a couple different paths, and along the way they can forget a lot of information, deviate from the sales process, which is going to result in a loss of leads or potential revenue as well. Also, I just want to go ahead and point out right here too, all along the process here, at some point they can say, hey, I'm not interested. Maybe it's not the right time for them to purchase a vehicle. Maybe they just don't like what you're offering them. Maybe they want to go with another person. But at some point, we always have to make it available that they're not interested. And this is going to make a little bit more sense when we're looking at the blueprint of why I'm pointing this out now. So yeah, it's a pretty common scenario for what we're using, but in general, I know all of you guys are probably going to have a lot more complicated sales process and a lot other different stages than this. So you can kind of see, as you start to kind of see, some of the intricacies of your own process, you really do need to adapt and scale it as it grows. So it's really important that your users do follow your process so that you can see what works and what doesn't and how you can actually adapt as well. So for this, Zoho has created a feature within the CRM called Blueprint. This is actually going to guide your users through what action should be taken at what time. It's going to prompt them for the mandatory information that you require at each single stage of your sales process, and it's going to do it in the right sequence as well. So this is going to guarantee that all your mandatory information is captured. It's also going to make sure that all the tasks that you need done within each stage is completed. And also, it's going to give you the ability to do a little bit of automation at the end of each stage as well. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the CRM. I know you guys are all pretty familiar about what it looks like now, but I want to go ahead and show you what it would look like with a blueprint enabled. So I'm just going to go ahead and go to a regular lead. But usually what we have, in this case, what we have is a lead status, which is actually going to guide us through the sales process. And if you notice, without a blueprint, there's no way for them to just be able to go in there, qualify whatever lead that they want to without getting any of the information, or making it a junk lead, just completely overriding your entire sales process. But let's go ahead and look at what it would look like when you blueprint it out. So if you look at a lead with a blueprint activated, what you're going to notice now is this nice gray rectangle right underneath your business card view. What you're going to notice is it's going to say under the current stage of the cell that it's in. This is a new lead, so it's come in not contacted. And then it's going to give the user a couple of different options in which way they can go, depending on what happens. Also, like I was saying, we have a lead status, which is what's guiding us through the sales process. And if you'll notice right beside it that there's a little lock. So now the user isn't able to just go in, update the lead status, and override your sales process. They have to follow through with some of these actions. So a couple of things we're going to go over in this session. And you'll have a really solid understanding by the end of it of how to build a blueprint, how to configure it and execute it. And we're going to go through the scenario that we went through and kind of see how it benefits us. Also, I'm going to go ahead and show you a couple different places where your blueprint records are organized in an easier way to see where they're at. And then a couple of ways to see the actions for each record within the blueprint. And last, I'll show you a couple of reports that we have that are specific to just blueprint. They'll be able to show you a couple different analytics on how your blueprint's performing and how you can adapt it over time. First, you guys have seen exactly what it looks like, but what it actually does is in each step, it's going to define each process in every single step of your sales process. You'll mandate and validate all the information contextually, and it's going to guide the user through the process and also automate a bunch of different tasks at each stage and guarantee that absolutely nothing falls through the cracks. So let's keep a couple of things in mind before we start using Blueprint. In order to use Blueprint, you're going to have your process really well thought out. And I know a bunch of you probably already have your sales process pretty well thought out. Maybe you've already configured your CRM to exactly what it is, but it's tough, if not near impossible, to blueprint a sales process if one doesn't exist or that you don't know what's going to happen during each stage, who's going to have it available to them, and what you want to happen after each stage happens. So, and Blueprint's specifically designed for process automation as well. I know Alan went over a couple of workflow rule automation, and you're probably thinking, what's the difference? I actually get a lot of questions about why, people are trying to use Blueprint instead of just workflow rules. Workflow rules are just going to be any automated tasks that you want to happen at a specific time. Blueprint is specific for our process control. This is going to be so that we bottleneck our users to using our sales process specifically and making sure that all of these events happen sequentially. So we have Blueprint in a couple of different editions. So we're going to have it, of course, in our Professional and Enterprise edition in just the CRM. With the Professional, you're going to be able to get 3 different blueprints, and in Enterprise, you'll be able to get 12. With CRM Plus and Zoho 1, you'll get 20 blueprints per each of those as well. And a couple of our different applications also have Blueprint in them. For example, Desk has a Blueprint as well. Okay, now that we kind of have seen what a blueprint does in action, let's see how it works a little bit and how one is designed and kind of update one that I already have and test it out. And just keep in mind, everyone's is going to be a little bit different. Everyone has a different sales process and also different tasks that need to be done each stage. So just keep that in mind too. We're just going to use a generalized case right now to see how it's designed and executed. So It may look a little bit cumbersome at first, but it's actually a pretty simple process. So it's drag and drop. So what we're gonna do is have each stage of our cells process, and we're gonna drag it over onto this blueprint. And then we're gonna configure out exactly what happens within the order, and also the different possibilities that can go from beginning to end. So, before we jump in to the design process, there's a couple important concepts that we need to know about Blueprint in order to be successful at configuring and designing one. This is understanding exactly what Blueprint consists of. So Blueprint consists of states and transitions. You can think of these as, I guess, the primary building blocks of Blueprint. First, we're gonna go over the state. So the states in the Blueprint are gonna be the stages of each of your cells process. In the example I showed you before with the car dealership, I used the lead status field, which is a pick list, to guide us from not contacted to either contacted or leave a voicemail to test drive to eventually qualified lead. And states are always going to be based off of a pick list, so keep that in mind as well, because you need each stage corresponding to each value within the pick list itself. And the point of the Blueprint too is to get the user to go from our start point all the way to the end of where we want them to go. That way they follow the process to a T. But how do they get there from state to state? How do we configure which actions need to happen on each one? And how do we make sure that all the things that after each transition is complete, those actions actually take place? So that's where our transitions are going to come in. And these are going to be our links in between each state. And since the transactions are where all the action takes place, there's going to be a little bit more to them that we need to look at. That way we can configure them. So in configuring a transition, we're going to have 3 different portions. And that's going to be our before, our during, and our after portion. So each time we create a transition, it's going to have this little sheet on the left. And the before section is actually going to be where we define who we want to see the blueprinted record. We can do this from just the record owner. We can do it to specific users, or you can make it for an entire role to see this, or you can create a group as well. The during portion is where we're actually going to define where all the mandatory information needs to happen. So in our during portion, we can leave them a note and tell the user, give the user a little bit more information, like, hey, leave a voicemail at this point. We can make notes and attachments mandatory, or any other field within the record itself mandatory as well. You can also make set up where you can validate whether or not the information is correct. So for example, we have a discount field within our CRM for a lead, and we're going to go ahead and set up a rule in a second that makes sure that they're not able to give any discount over 15%. And then lastly, the after portion is going to be any of the actions that are going to take place after each transition is complete. So we can do a couple different things here. We can send out some email notifications. We can update fields, add tags, run some custom functions, and even run some webhooks, which might be a little advanced at this point. But as you start to learn the system a little bit more and get a little bit more savvy with it, just know that that's some possibilities that you can do as well. And the last thing I want to talk about before we start looking at the design itself is the difference between a continuous and a non-continuous blueprint. So these are going to be the only 2 that we have right now. And a continuous blueprint is one in which is going to run right all at once. So there's not going to be any pauses in between each stage of the process. And it can only have one owner for the record itself because of this. And this is really perfect for maybe new people if you have like a call script that you want to make them adhere to for each process. But in this case, we're going to be creating and using a non-continuous blueprint. If you're able to use a non-continuous blueprint, it's really easy to extrapolate it into a continuous one. And the reason why we're going to do this is because we can do a couple more things, because each stage can happen at a different point in time, and we can have different people take over to it. We can do a little bit more with it. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the design for it. So if you go to your setup page, and that's going to be the wrench icon in the top right, you'll notice that blueprint is the first choice under process management, which is the first column on the bottom. And we're going to go in here. I already have some blueprints configured right now. So this is where you'll see ones that you've already have. And you can actually deactivate them at any time by clicking on this green button at the far right. And it's going to give you a couple of information on what module it's in. You can make it layout specific, and then also you're going to choose your field. And where you set up all this is when you create a new blueprint, it's going to ask you to give it a name. And also, it's gonna be module specific. So you can create this for any of the modules that you have, and then also any of the layouts that you have. So Tasha created a couple of new layouts whenever she was showing you how to set up the CRM earlier, and you can choose those. We just had a blueprint layout that we created for this as well. So, and then lastly is where you would choose your field. So remember what I was saying earlier, it has to be a pick list field, and we were using our lead status. This is going to be the pick list field that's going to guide you through your process. So you want it to be a pick list field because you want each value to correspond to each stage in your sales process. We can also get really specific about which records we want entered into the blueprint by just adding some additional criteria. And if any of the criteria on your records matches it, then it'll go into it. But let's go ahead and take a look at one that I already have created. So like I was saying, each of the states are going to be right here on the right. I have a couple of states that I didn't really use because they weren't really applicable to this process for lead generation. So I didn't pull them over, but you can see it's pretty easy. I just pulled all the states over. And once the states are over, you can actually, there's going to be these little tiny blue dots right here, and you can actually point it to each one of these. So it's actually pretty easy. You just set it up in sequential order the way that you want it. And then whenever you want to create a transition, you would actually just click on this red plus sign, and you can name it whatever you want. And then it's going to go ahead and ask you to configure each portion like we talked about. The before, so this is going to be wherever we define who has access to it. And like I was saying, it can be a specific user, a role, or a group. It can be during, which you can make your notes mandatory, attachments, or any of the fields that we have. You can also set a message, kind of give them some more information, and then also a checklist as well. So we're going to add a couple more things within our transitions right here because we added a couple of different things to it as well. So let's say after they test drive, we want them to add in what kind of discount that they would want, which is a field within the leads. And then we want to say, we want to go ahead and give some validation rules for it too, and make sure that the discount doesn't go over 15%. We'd configure that right here. And then we'll add an error message as well. Also, after they do a test drive, we'd want to go ahead and send them an email. So we can go ahead and do that as well. A couple of things I just want to show you real quick here is you can add in follow-up tasks, email notifications to them for after the transition's complete. And again, like I was saying, some webhooks and custom functions, and then add a tag as well. But let's go ahead and do an email as well. And Tasha actually created us a template earlier that said test drive. And then we would just hit publish and then go ahead and look at all of the leads that we have and test it out. Once you've configured and designed your blueprint, you can go ahead and execute it for the ones that the criteria is going to fit. I made this one pretty generalized. The only criteria that you need is that it has to be in the layout that I have. And then at that point, your users will start seeing that box. So let's go ahead and take a look at the blueprint itself. So let's go ahead and go through the process a little bit and show you. So once I hit answered call, it's going to ask them for all the pertinent information that we designated within the transition itself. It's going to make them add a note, the make, the model, the color, the year. And once they get to the next stage of it, after we've been through contacted, then they go through and do the test drive. So again, just put in a note. And lastly, this one right here is going to ask us for a discount. So if we try to put in more than 15%, it's going to give us our error. So now you can see at each stage, there's no way for them to forget any of the important information they want. There's no way for any of the follow-up communication or tasks to get dropped. And also, if some of the information, for example, this discount's put in incorrectly, there's no way for them to enter it without getting into an error. Also, a nice thing is if you guys have the CRM app or you guys go out into the field a lot or have a lot of users that use the app out in the field, this is compatible with our CRM mobile app as well, which is on Apple and Android phones. I definitely recommend downloading it because it's pretty good. Okay, so last I'm going to go ahead and show you a more organized way to see what all records are in your blueprints and how you can access them a little bit easier. So if you'll notice, once you actually set up a blueprint, you're going to have a new tab right up here on the top called My Jobs. And if you go into it, you can see all the records that are in a blueprint. You can see the name of the leads, what module the blueprint is under, who owns the record, when it was last modified, and also which blueprint you created. If you have multiple of them, then it's going to be easier for you to tell if you name them appropriately. Also, a nice thing about this right here, my Jobs, is you don't need to go directly into the record to be able to run the actions. You can run them here, and it'll ask you for the information right here. And if you do go into the record and you're wondering, if I click on not interested or interested in the car, what stage will it take me next? There's a view configured actions on the far right. They'll give you kind of a breakdown map if you have multiple choices to see where it'll end up. This is also really important whenever you're trying to debug why it's not working right. So yeah, keep that in mind as well. And we don't have a ton of time to go through some of the reporting, but I do want to show you where it's at because I think it's some pretty important information to understand exactly how well your blueprint is running, especially if you're starting to understand what your sales process needs to do to adapt. It's really good to see how long your blueprints are in a certain stage or how long it took for them to go through a transition. Maybe you want to see all the records and which ones are associated with the blueprint. So again, we're going to go to the setup page by clicking on the wrench icon at the top. And under process management, go to blueprint. And you'll notice there's two tabs right up here at the top. One that says blueprint, where you can create a new one, maybe delete one or deactivate one, and then also usage. So like I was saying, you can see there's a couple of different reports, but one of them that I think is really beneficial is something like this right here is going to be average time per state. You choose the blueprint that you have, and it'll show you how long each records are staying within the blueprint or within those states. There's also another report that'll show you the transactions as well. That way you can narrow down, hey, we're taking too much time here and not contacted. We need to make sure that we're contacting them quicker. And as your processes as your business starts scaling and your processes start to get more complicated, this makes it a lot easier to understand exactly how they're using. Thanks, y'all.